Welcome to the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, where we simplify the complexities of your leadership journey. Remember that if you're really interested in growing your influence, just make sure that you guys follow along, click that subscribe button, and then additionally head over to our website, rtclc.com, sign up to get that newsletter so that you never miss a drop from us. As always, I'm Scott, and with me is our leadership strategist, Dr. Michael David Morales, aka Mo.
Hey, what's up, Scotty? Good stuff today. I can't wait to hear your story. Let's do it.
So leadership isn't just about making the right decisions. It's about making them effectively, especially when the stakes are life and death. One of the clearest examples of this comes from President John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The world was on the brink of nuclear war, and Kennedy faced a situation where having the right plan wasn't enough. His mission was simple: protect the United States and prevent catastrophe. But how he delivered that message mattered just as much as the message itself. Kennedy had to adapt the same core message for very different audiences. To the American public, he went on live television, calm and reassuring, explaining the threat in a way that was serious but didn't provoke panic, showing that the nation had a plan. In the White House, with the executive committee of the National Security Council, he switched gears completely, speaking in precise technical terms, debating blockades, airstrikes, and timing with military leaders and advisors. And when communicating through back channels and carefully measured statements with the Soviet leadership, he signaled strength and resolve while carefully avoiding escalation that could trigger a nuclear disaster. Even when his instructions were clear, challenges remained. Military leaders pressed for more aggressive action, advisors debated the best course, and tensions ran high. Kennedy had to continually clarify, reframe, and adjust his tone so each audience not only heard the message, but truly understood it. By tailoring his communication to the listener, he maintained internal unity, navigated one of the most dangerous moments in modern history, and demonstrated a timeless leadership lesson. It's not enough to be clear. You must be understood, respected, and adaptable in how you deliver your message. And that's overall the essence of adaptable leadership. It's not enough to have the right message. You have to deliver it in a way that resonates with each listener. Because when clarity meets complexity, leadership isn't about being heard once, it's about being understood and inspiring action. And we're talking a lot about communication today and adapting your communication, which is so important because your communication style is different from your neighbors. It's different from your best friends. It's different from your spouses. It's different from your moms. It's different from your dads, whoever it may be. And how you communicate with individuals can make or break a conversation, just like with JFK. Could have made or broken that communication and that communication with Gorbachev in that instance. And we could be looking at a completely different world. And so, Mo, why don't you kind of take us away and lead us into kind of our first point for today?
Yeah, I really love the topic of communication. Leaders, you need to become a communication guru. Adaptability is going to be one of your biggest strengths when it comes to communication. And the first point is this: same message, different people. Leaders, you're going to have a ton of different people in your life. All of them are going to be different in their communication styles, like Scotty said, the way that they hear things, the way that they say things, but the message has to stay the same. When you have vision, when you have a mission, you know where you're going. You've got the people on your team. You now have to make sure to get the same message to people who are all going to hear things differently. And that's really tough because communication adaptability is the ability to change the way that you deliver a message to different people because things change, but the actual message itself needs to stay the same. Otherwise, you're going to confuse people and they're not going to do well. That's going to mess up everything on the team. So what should a leader do? Well, I'll tell you what a leader should never do. A leader should never change the truth based on the audience. Don't say something that is untrue just so you can get somebody to do what you need them to do. Leaders, you've got to focus on truth. You got to make sure that you communicate things well while not losing what's important, which is always the truth. So if you should always, stay on that message and never change the truth, what should you do? Leaders, you need to change the tone, the pace, the detail, the emphasis based on who's receiving what you're saying. So the way that I talk to Scott is a lot different than the way that I talk to anybody else on my team. because Scott is a specific individual. He might even have the same personality as somebody else on the team, but that doesn't mean that he hears things the same way. So a lot of people will tell me, "Well, Mo, are you telling me not to be real? Then didn't you just tell me to tell the truth?" Yeah, the Bible says speak the truth in love. But it doesn't say be a jerk. You need to be real. Do not be fake. But to be effective, you need to help others hear what you're saying. And trust me, they'll hear things differently.
And I think that's a really good point that you make. I think speaking the truth is so incredibly important. I think there's so often, and as we look at things, we hear that oh, it's okay to tell a little white lie, right? Like because it makes it easier for them to process. But in
Right.
reality, it's just always so much better to hear the truth. And at the end of the day, that person's going to be thankful for that. But additionally, on top of that, just with what you said about how it's all about the delivery. I think we all know those individuals that it's like that person is incredibly blunt. They're very straightforward. They get to the point. And true, maybe that's your personality, but you don't always have to deliver that way. You don't always have to communicate that way. And you can adapt that bluntness or you can alter or change that bluntness depending on that individual that you're talking to. And I think that's just such a great and wise point to make and to understand for our leaders.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, Scotty, because when somebody tells, and that's probably the one that most of us hear. Well, I'm just a blunt person. I tell it how it is. And people just have, what you're telling me is you don't know how to adapt to your settings. You're telling me that you have hit your leadership ceiling and your leadership lid is very low because your boss may want a 30-second version with quick action items. Your fellow employees may need practical steps. They may need reassurance on how to do things. There might be high performers that are underneath you and are looking to you as a leader, and they need freedom and ownership. You might have somebody new on the team, and that new person needs structure. They need extra explanation. And trust me, there's people that are on your staff right now, leaders, that are struggling. And if you have a struggling employee on your team, that person's going to need extra encouragement and confidence. All of those people that I just named right there all need a different way of you communicating with them. And if you're just blunt or however you are, then you're not being a good leader. You might be a manager, but that's about it. And when somebody says something like that to me, oh, I'm just like this, or I'm just like that, or over the years I've just become this kind of person, all I hear is this person has reached their leadership lid and they're not adaptable. Because adaptability is not about manipulation. Manipulation changes the message to benefit you as the speaker, but adaptability changes the delivery to benefit the listener. I want to benefit the people that I'm talking to. I want to be a healthy leader. Healthy leadership communication is always focused on helping other people succeed. And you can't think about yourself when you're thinking about other people. Leaders, you need to be a great communicator. I tell people all the time, good speakers are a dime a dozen. Good communicators are one in a million. I want to be a great communicator. Great communicators are translators. They know how to take a
Mm.
message and they know how to make it understandable for a lot of different people. They don't assume that everybody thinks the way that they do. And they know that the goal isn't simply just to be heard, the goal is to connect. And that's why when we here at Rising Tide take people through the DISC assessment, we tell our leaders this: you need to know your personality style so that you can lead from your personality to the personalities of the people that you lead. It's not good enough to just know your personality. I need to know how Scott hears things, because if I'm trying to talk to Scott in the way that I would hear something, trust me, he's not going to hear it, because Scott and I have very different personalities, and it's my job to help Scott understand what I'm thinking. And when Scotty talks to me, he knows my personality, so he knows how I hear things, and he shifts things as well. Leaders, are you doing that?
Again, such a great point. And I think too, one of the things that comes to mind is the follow-up, right? We always, think we explain things well sometimes. And we get so frustrating, or I should say it becomes so frustrating sometimes when we're like, oh, yep, we explained it to them. Cool. They're gonna accomplish that. They're gonna get it done. And then it's just not done. And we're like, we can't understand why. We're just, they must not have gotten it. They're the ones to blame. It's their fault. But really, that's self reflection, right? If we're talking about extreme ownership, right? We take that, then that fault lies with us, right? As leaders, we
Yes.
have to evaluate: are we actually communicating effectively. And so we have to look into those things.
And the last thing I would say, Scotty, about this point before we move to the next one is this. John Maxwell's got a ton of good books. You and I, just before we jumped on to this recording, we talked about a leader that you've been talking to who says that, man, I'm a John Maxwell fan. Well, John Maxwell has a book called Everyone Communicates, but Few Connect. And in that book, he talks about communication not being measured by what's said, but by what people actually understand and remember. So, leaders, when you talk, it doesn't matter what you want people to hear. What are they understanding that you're saying, and what are they remembering that you're saying?
Yeah, that's great too. One of the things that came to my mind, we talked about the individual who's known as like the straightforward individual. The other one that came to my mind is the one that they don't listen to me, or what's the point of talking to them because they don't listen. And you may think of yourself of, you may know that about yourself. That's what my coworkers say about me, but I do listen to them. But it's, how are you listening to them? Are you distracted? Are you practicing good listening? And it's there's techniques, there are techniques to being a good listener, and, if we're talking about Maxwell, right? Like maybe that's what, those individuals are doing. Maybe they're not practicing that good listening. But anyway, I know, for our second point here, as we get into it, there's that question that still remains that, what happens when you really break it down, when you make it as simple as you possibly can, but you still just can't get through. You still just can't get through to that individual. And I know
Yeah.
that's going to kind of take us into the second point, and we're going to kind of talk about it. So, Mo, why don't you kind of take us into this second point for today?
Yeah, the second point is this: when clear still isn't effective. What do I mean by that? Leaders often confuse being clear with being effective. I talk about clarity a lot. Clarity is one of my number one. Whenever I talk to people, I always ask them at the very end, am I being clear? Is there anything else that I need to clear up? Do you need more clarity? I use that word because I want people to be clear on my thoughts, my expectations, or what I owe them. I'll say, well, I just want to be clear. This is what I owe you. And that helps a lot. But that doesn't mean
Mm,
that I'm being effective. A leader can explain something perfectly and still fail to connect with an audience. Have you ever been sitting and listening to a speaker and you hear what they say, but they're just not connecting with you? Because communication is successful just because words are coming out of your mouth. Communication is successful when people understand it, remember it, but the third thing is this: they need to act on it. Leaders, are your people acting on the words that you're saying? Sometimes leaders give information and then they do this: they forget about emotion. Facts matter, yes, but emotions matter too, and sometimes more than the facts. People don't just hear information through their ears, they hear information through stress, fears, insecurities, expectations, all these things that they're going through. Whenever somebody tells me, Mo, this person on my team just doesn't get it, I always ask this question: what's going on in their life right now? And I would say 3 times out of 4, the leader will look back at me like, what do you mean? What am I talking about? Oh, what's going on in their life? Aren't we talking about what's happening at work? And Scotty, it's not enough to know what's going on at work. You need to know your people outside of work. You need to know what they're doing. You need to know who's in their life. What are their stressors? What are the things that make them happy? What are the things that are they afraid of? So think of it like this: we need, as leaders, we need to improve our numbers by 10%. And I'm not talking about we need 10% more sales this quarter. What I'm talking about is 10% of whatever you're talking about. So at your job, you probably would love to get 10% better, right? But if you were to go to your people and say, we need to improve our numbers by 10%, what would they hear? They're all going to hear something different. One person's going to hear motivation. Somebody else is going to feel a lot of pressure. Oh man, 10%. Another person's going to hear fear. They're going to say 10%. We had 2% of whatever our sales or whatever the metric was on the quarter before. And another person might hear opportunity to prove themselves. They might think, oh yeah, there we go. The boss wants 10% better of me, or for whatever it is. This is my time to shine. Here's my point: whatever metric you're using, everybody hears it differently. Leaders have to think more about the content than anything else. Why? Because when you're thinking about the content of what you're needing and those expectations, here's what matters: Timing matters, tone matters, emotional state of your team matters, context matters, trust matters. There's a lot of things that matter when you are trying to communicate with your team. And I'll tell you this, Scotty, communication breakdowns, here's what they are. They're adaptive failures, and we want to be adaptive communicators. Sometimes the message itself is fine. Leaders, I get it. You work a lot on your messaging. You want your people to feel the clarity. I just told you, clarity matters to me. But the issue sometimes is that the leader just doesn't think carefully enough about how people are receiving it. Sometimes we just walk into the room and we just start saying things. Leaders, you need to think, who's on my team? How are they going to hear it? How did I say it? And sometimes you even need to ask yourself, did my people hear this the way that I intended? That's why we journal. How many times, Scotty, have you and I had a conversation and I would say, man, well, what did you journal about this? And Scott knows now to journal. He's got Scotty's big book of leadership, or Scotty P's big book of leadership,
Yep.
right? And that's important because we as leaders need to write things down because we need to see it in front of us. Leaders, are you seeing the things that you're saying to people? Because your people, they're waiting for you, but they might hear your message, but you need to ask yourself, how is each person on my team hearing that message? When you start doing that, you will be more effective.
Mo, you mentioned about just connecting with the individuals that you're talking to. So, what do you recommend for our leaders then that really kind of lead a large group of people? It's easier to connect when you've got a smaller team. You get to know those individuals a lot more intimately. But I mean, if you're leading a team that's got such a large group of people, if you're leading if you're the lead on a warehouse floor, right? Like say you're the supervisor of an Amazon warehouse floor, right? And you've got, 50, 100 individuals that you're overseeing. How do you connect with those individuals? And if you're instructing or giving out instructions or talking to those individuals really all at once, say you're talking to 50, 100 individuals, how do you connect with those individuals? Or is it something where it's just you hope you connect with some and then you try to stop by smaller groups and connect? What advice do you have for our leaders that have those bigger groups?
Yeah, great question. And I think you almost answered it. And I would expect that because you and I have been doing stuff for so long now. But I would say it's all of the above. And I'll tell you a story from John Maxwell's 21-year period of laws of leadership. When they were building a new sanctuary for the church that he was pastoring, they wanted to be clear to everybody who was on the team. Everybody that was on the team, John Maxwell saw as somebody who had skin in the game. As you can imagine, there were a lot of leaders. Even the followers really understood what was going on, and they made sure that they were clear about everything. And John Maxwell said this: I had conversations one-on-one more times than I can remember. And then when he would start having those one-on-one conversations, he would then start having small group conversations. Scotty, you mentioned that. He would say, well, I'm gonna invite these 5 or 10 people to lunch or to my office for a strategy session. And then he would expand on that and he would make the group bigger. And then he would have different groups of people throughout the church. But he kept having those individual conversations. He kept having those 2 or 3 conversations. He kept having those small group conversations so that when they started having the corporate conversations, he knew that people would have buy-in. So,
Mm.
Scotty P, I know you already know I'm talking about the law of the buy-in, but for our audience, he knew that to get people to buy in, you needed individual conversations, you needed those conversations with just a couple, then you needed those small group conversations, and then the corporate conversations. Here's the funny thing about that story about when they were coming down to the last blueprint of the church. When they brought it to the congregation, he asked, is there any questions? And the only question that somebody really had, and I mean, there may have been a couple others, but for the sake of the story, here's what he said. Said, the only question that really came up was, where are the water fountains going to be? Everything else was good. I mean, this was a multi-million-dollar project, and it was funny that there weren't very many questions, if any at all. But why was that? Because Maxwell himself said, I've got to make sure that I'm clear about this and get people out on my side. I know not everybody is going to hear this the same way. So I need to have conversations with everybody on the things that matter to them. So for some people, I'm sure it was, how do we do this financially? Other people thought, well, if when are we going to move into this new building, and how are we going to do that move? Are we going to lose leaders in the process, or everybody, how's parking going to be? All these things. John Maxwell had to make sure that he addressed all those concerns, and he did. And so I'll say this: there's a great book, Scotty P, and I think you've read it by Patrick Lencioni. It's called The Advantage. And in that book, he emphasizes that leaders have to repeat messages over and over again. They have to do it often, they have to do it clearly, because people hear things through their own filters. We've all got a filter. And Scott, my filter might be different one day than it is another day. I have different stressors each day. I have things that some days I feel great, sometimes I don't. So I hear things differently. Your people are going to hear things differently. Leaders, give the message often, give it clearly, and know that your people have filters, and it's nobody's fault. They just hear things different at different times. And you might say, I've already had this conversation with this guy. You got to have it again. The second time you have it, he or she might have a different filter that they're using. That's why you got to have it 2, 3, 4 times or more sometimes. But I want to be the kind of leader that when it comes to making the big decisions, somebody says, where the water fountain's going to be? And I want that to be the biggest thing that I'm worried about. So leaders, you can do that. Just be communicative and don't get frustrated when you have to have those communications. Adapt your communication style to the people you're leading. Great question, Scotty P.
Well, Mo, with that, do you have any final thoughts for us before we sign off for today?
Just remember that your communication style is going to get stronger, and you're going to start to see some of those blind spots if you communicate often and you communicate clearly. Because when what you're saying feels natural to the people that you talk to, they're eventually going to come around, and their frustrations are going to subside. And when they see that you are really caring about how they're hearing it and how they're receiving it, and you care about communicating specifically with them, they're going to be on your side. So leaders, remember this. The question is, are you able to communicate to each person on their level at that specific time and place with whatever's going on in their life? That's the tough part. But Scotty P, if you know your people and you're talking to them, you'll know what's going on. You and I talk about this all the time. I'll say, hey, how's so-and-so doing at work? How's so-and-so? You always know. And because you know when to have a conversation, when not to have a conversation, and how to tread within a conversation, even if you need to have that conversation and you're like, this can't wait. And I know it's not the greatest time. How do I use this depending on the filter that they're using? Leaders, you can do it. Just remember, how do I be more adaptable in the way that I communicate?
Well, everyone, we hope that we've communicated effectively with you today. So thank you for spending part of your day with us. I thank you so much for listening to us today. If you enjoyed what you heard, just make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Hop over to our website at rtclc.com. Find our newsletters, subscribe to it. That way you can hear all the insights, the tidbits that we don't get to mention here on the show. For now and until next time, just make sure that you lead with purpose, stay authentic, and make an impact.